I'm Kalafi Moala, the son of Matthew Moala, and I come from Kolomotua. You see, I'm trying to identify myself. And he looked at me with a big smile. He said, come inside. He said, your father used to teach me at school. Come in. And I come from Kolomotua, from the same area of Nuku'alofa where I had come from. So I was there for one night, and then the next day, Nauru decided to fly north, and so I was able to take that flight again and go on. But here it is, we all have identities, national identities, cultural identities. We have other identities that I want to share with a little bit. But you see, those identities are not adequate enough. They're not sufficient to really place us. You see, I have a racial, cultural identity as a Tongan. But you see, that's not sufficient. It doesn't give me peace, doesn't give me salvation, it doesn't give me a sense of recognition. You know, Tongan. Can you imagine when I'm facing the devil? What do? I said, in the name of being a Tongan, I resist you. Now, we Tongans may play a little bit of good rugby. We may have other talents, but it was never meant to be my identity, the racial, the cultural. You know, one of my best friends was an Aussie. He came from Queensland, from a little town called Gatton, which is not on the way to Toowoomba. And I worked with him as a missionary in Papua New Guinea. And man, he was a rough Aussie. One of the roughest Aussies I've ever met. I loved this guy. We became very, very close friends. And to this day, 40-something years later, we're still close buddies. But this guy, you know, I had to try to understand him, his language, his accent for the first few months that he came and became a part of my team there in Papua New Guinea. Rough Aussie. And I used to think all Aussies are rough like that until I met people who were not from Outback, Queensland. We have identities in many of our different nationalities. We have the Americans, for example. Bless the Americans, they're very polite people. You know, I mean, they may talk too loudly. They may be asking too many questions as tourists, but they're usually quite polite. You know, they always say, when you say thank you, you're welcome. You're welcome. I notice Australians are developing that at the restaurants now. I go, thank you, you're welcome. Polite. You know, we all have our different identities, racially and culturally. But listen, folks, that is not sufficient at all. Our base of identity must be Jesus Christ, must be God the Father that we're linked with. He is our origin. When we're born again, we become a child of God, and that new birth takes us out of all other identities and puts us, as our identity is, we have God as a Father. Of course, there are other things that we have as the base of our identity. Some of us, we live in this material world, and the material world becomes our basis of identity. Let me throw in something in there. You know, it becomes even our identity, the suburb where we live at. You know, in Auckland, New Zealand is where my second home is. When we say, oh, where do you live? There's a place there called Otara. And Otara is where a lot of Pacific Islanders live. They say, I think wrongly, that a lot of crime comes out of Otara. Sometimes you go through Otara and they have all the graffiti and everything. So whenever they ask you, say, where you come from? I say, I live in Otara. They go, ooh. But if they say, where you come from? I live in Remuera. That's another suburb where all the rich people and all the mostly white people live there. See? So it becomes even an identity thing with us. I know a friend of mine, a Tongan, who came from the United States while the US dollar was still high, and he bought a house in Remuera. And I said to him, why did you do that? Why couldn't you buy a house somewhere else, near the airport in Mangere? Why do you have to buy in Remuera? Because he says, I do that. He said, it's horrible, it's so expensive, and I'm almost broke having to pay the mortgage every month. But I've got to be there because it's a nice area. His identity was based on where he was living. Our identity is so tied up sometimes with what we have materially, with the kind of car that we drive. Yeah? Okay? What do you drive? You know? A Commodore? What? You know, that's a horrible car. Isn't it? You know, I got a new Hyundai, you know, or I've got a BMW, you know. What kind of car? I have a friend of mine that in California that bought a Hummer. You know those Hummer, those ugly looking thing that cost about $150,000? I said to him, why on earth do you buy a Hummer? Oh, because Arnold Schwarzenegger had 5 of those. So we get so taken up with all the different things that we think build up our identity. You know, our identity is to provide us with our sense of recognition, our sense of security, our sense of peace. And false identities will never provide that for us. Never will. Well, other things in the Pacific Islands, we're into this education thing right now. You know, you hear parents, island parents that sit down, they talk about their kids, they go, oh man, you know, Joshua, he was top of his class. Oh, you know, Susan, my goodness, he's just graduated and he's going to university. You know, we talk about that, about our kids, you know. And what we talk about our kids is what's important for us, you know. And then finally they graduate out of university. A lady, Samoan lady, recently in Auckland, in a big meeting where we were talking about missions, I was challenging islanders that they need to look beyond just getting wealthy. They need to look beyond and get the purpose in Jesus. And after the service, this lady came up and she was in tears. And she said to me, almost angrily, she said, you know, my husband and I, we left Samoa and we came in here to New Zealand to look for a better life. We worked hard at the factories. We put our kids through school. And those children have just graduated from universities. And they are really getting nice jobs. In fact, they've bought us our house. We don't live in a state house anymore. In fact, my husband and I, we each have a car. We drive a nice car. And he said, and she said, in tears, she said, and you're trying to tell us that those things are not really that important? You're trying to tell us to leave those, to follow what Jesus wants you to do? And I had to kind of comfort her, and I said, no, those things are not unimportant. They are important. And God blesses us with good things. But God never intends those things to be the basis of our identity. Because if we make it the basis of identity, we will still be insecure. We will still be looking for better and greater things to find recognition. We will never have peace and satisfaction because those things come through what? Relationship with the Almighty God. It comes through a sense of destiny, how God calls us and gifted us. Those are the two things that made up the identity of Jesus Christ. Who are you? Say, oh, I'm all of this. Remember, we have these things in some circles. It's called the cocktails. And the cocktails, you know, we Tongans even adopted. The cocktails is where people dress up their best. We used to dress up our best in church. But now, you know, we don't. Because we knew that dressing up our best doesn't bring down the presence of the Lord. So we go to cocktails and we dress up our best. And in the cocktails, in these cocktails, we compare notes with all the others. You know, we talk about work and about job, and we talk most of the time about money. You know, and when, if you're new there, you go, do you notice in the West, one of the first things that you ask, they don't really care whose son are you. You know what they ask for? What do you do? Because what you do is your identity. What do you do? You go, oh well, I'm a brain surgeon. Oh yeah? Did you know he's a brain surgeon? What do you do? I collect rubbish. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, I asked. So what do? We identify people and put them in a category according to their what? Their careers. And so here we are, we're going. You know, it's really interesting. There is a shop in Honolulu, Hawaii, where I lived for many years. It's called Liberty House. And I don't know what's the equivalent here. I know maybe in Melbourne, they've got Myers, they've got David Jones, expensive stores. And so we have some people that they go to a Salvation Army store and they'll do their shopping in there, and then for about $3 they go in and buy a Liberty House bag and put their shopping in the bag. And they walk up and down the street, kind of almost, I got Liberty, a Liberty bag. Why do people do silly stuff like that? It's because of identity. We're seeking for an identity outside of Christ. We're seeking for things that gives us an identity that is inadequate. It's not sufficient enough. It's so shallow. It doesn't give us satisfaction, doesn't give us peace. And so that's my word for you this Christmas. Find your identity in Jesus Christ. Get rid of all the false things that we base our identity. Those things are not sufficient enough. People die. You know, the pressures that are on families and on people because they're seeking identities that are not false, that are false and not true. And Jesus said to us, just come. My yoke is what? My yoke is easy. My burden is light. You know, take on my identity. I have died, I have risen from the dead, so that you can be adopted as a son, as a child, a daughter of God. That's the basis of our identity. And that's the thing that will unleash for us as sons and daughters of God all the blessings, all the different things that God will give to us to be complete human beings that are blessed by the living God.